Hello, hello, hello,
Hello.
hello. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
How did we pull off that perfect opening? Wow. We're getting too pro.
We're just that cool.
Years in television before I upended my life.
Really?
That's how it works. How are you guys? Oh, I should say, welcome to the Big Gay Mess. This is, we thought we should mark Pride Month because it's easy to forget that Pride and the rainbow and LGBT organizations aren't merely authoritarian monsters. There's actually good people within all these groups who are trying to make them better. So we thought we'd speak to a few of them today. Some of our gender critical gay male chums. Artie, can you tell us a little bit about who's coming on?
Oh, a bunch of homosexual men. I'm not the only gay in this village. I'm really excited to meet a lot of these guys. These are people I've been following online and I admire tremendously.
Yes.
Who's on the roster again?
we have John. I know we have Johnny Best, who appeared last night on that big talk about Stonewall and was very powerful. And James Dreyfus. Who else? Well, there's a few surprises, shall we say?
Yeah.
Yes, but before they all start getting in here with their muscles. Is there anything we should talk about? I just want to mention briefly that people are possibly not paying. Well, I say they're not paying attention, but I haven't seen much talk really about the Sonia Appleby case and the Keira Bell case, both of which are happening at the moment. And I'm hoping that they both produce a good result. I'm a bit nervous about Keira. Because
I've seen a lot. There's a lot going on. Lots of people talking about it. There's live tweeting, and it's actually on live. Although apparently the sound quality is not great. But yeah, no, people are certainly taking note. I'm quite nervous about it. I'm glad we've got this to distract us.
Yes. But Sonia Appleby, her case has already revealed some extremely worrying things, and I really hope finally that the people responsible for queer theory and queer theory and gender ideology capturing the Tavistock, which is just wreaking havoc with young kids' lives. I'm hoping that's finally. I'm hoping that it's the. I mean, sorry, we've had culture with Jess DeWalls, we've had sports with Laurel Hubbard. I think one of the other pieces of the puzzle is children. It's probably the biggest piece, in fact, the biggest piece of the puzzle, and the biggest thing that will, I think, peak trans the whole country when they realize what's been happening.
Yes, but Laurel Hubbard has massive peak trans. Hasn't that's really blown up? I think There's a lot of men suddenly, presumably because actually men cared about sports. There's a lot of men saying this is so obviously unfair. So obviously unfair. Lots of people sort of putting their head above the parapet and actually saying it out loud. In fact, who was it today? They actually got 4 men on to talk about it, didn't they? And
on the Moral Maze, the Moral Maze is hosting a discussion on whether male involvement in women's sports is okay, and they've asked 4 males to speak about it.
I think the panel also has 2 women on it. The actual sort of panel of the Moral Maze, but the 4 guests that they've brought in are all male-born people.
Yeah. Well, but let's move back to children because our first guest has something to talk about with that. It's Daniel Webb who's here now, and Daniel, I believe, is someone who did a lot of work looking into the Webberleys. So let's just bring him in and we can just get this show on the road, get this big gay show on the road. Hello, Daniel. Nice to meet you.
Hi.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you very much for joining us. We've all been enjoying your enjoying is possibly the wrong word, but your threads on Helen Webberley's operation have been really illuminating. Can you take us through a little bit on what you've been up to in investigating them?
I think my investigation was mostly around the finances and the ownership of the organisation. I sort of followed this with some interest last year, albeit indirectly, and I'm not really sure what sort of dragged me into it. I think it might have been just one of those sort of, you know, rabbit holes that one goes down on the internet sometimes, and you start digging at something and think, oh, good grief.
Yeah.
And so I think what always struck me about Helen Webberley was just the sheer brazenness of her approach. And the absolute shamelessness with which she sort of carried out her business. And I thought, she's either evil or deluded. And I can't really work out which, to be honest, to this day. And I think I must have come across some internet post at some point talking about the sale of the of GenderGP following her conviction, and I happened upon the Harland International's website, the company that supposedly brought out GenderGP, and there was a very telling comment on there, and it sort of Harland International, who supposedly own GenderGP, is precisely a web page and an office registration somewhere. And though I'll come on to this later, they don't actually own GenderGP anymore. But there was something along the lines of the bottom of the web page, we own GenderGP, and if you say otherwise, we'll see you in court.
Wow, that's an interesting thing to put on a website. Daniel, before you go on, may I just give a little bit more background? Because some people are asking in the comments. GenderGP were providing puberty blockers, and they were endorsed officially by mermaids. So that's who GenderGP are. Helen Webberley and her husband are basically GenderGP.
And they sell drugs to gender non-conforming children at great profit. They're a private enterprise making money selling pharmaceuticals in the gender trade, which is what they really did. Big money-making machine. Yeah.
Sorry, Daniel, go ahead.
That's okay, and I think prior to this as well, I mean, just to sort of a little bit of context, which might be useful. It's my understanding as well that Helen Webberley did dabble in fertility drugs as well, I think, before hitting on this particular income stream. So I think one day I found myself sort of, you know, in an idle moment, thought it's fun to do a little bit more digging into Harland International, and I think you did as well, didn't you, Graham? For a while, I think you reported on this around the fact that Harland International is just in fact a shell company with unknown owners based in Hong Kong.
I think that was based on your threads, Daniel.
So anyway, Twitter is a wonderful place for finding this, and I started digging into this, and people started messaging me, and I purchased a couple more official documents. And what became apparent quite quickly was that whilst Harland International supposedly existed and acquired GenderGP, very soon after this, about a year later, Harland International was itself acquired by a company in Belize.
What was the company called?
Roton Executors, I think it was. Do forgive me, I'm sort of remembering.
Don't worry.
Now, can I step in for a minute? Now, weren't there some issues with GenderGP in the law and Helen Webberley in the law? Helen Webberley, who owns GenderGP, she was stricken from the medical license registry or something like that. Is that right?
I think that's ongoing. Both her and her husband at the moment are facing procedures to sort of strip them of their sort of ability to practice medicine. Though both of them will say now that they don't actually practice medicine. Helen claims to be just an advisor to GenderGP, and her husband Mike claims to be retired.
But that's obviously, and not only that, but wasn't GenderGP forced to stop operating within the UK or something like that as well?
Helen was fined for running an illegal clinic, an unregistered clinic, an unlicensed clinic.
Yeah, so this is a company that's selling gender drugs, was fined for doing it without a license, that's run by a husband and wife who are medical practitioners, but are having their licenses, there's procedures to revoke their licenses. Helen and her husband was flounced off to Spain, I believe. Is that right? And the company itself, which was told not to operate in the UK anymore, is now being owned by this mysterious shell company whose owners are unknown, that is operating out of Belize. And if you do a Google image search of the offices of this place, it's like It's like some dusty shack in the middle of a desert with tumbleweeds rolling by, kind of thing, you know.
Well, it's even sleazier than that, if I might suggest. The address doesn't exist. The address that they use for the shell companies that own all this doesn't exist. You can find the address. It's on GenderGP's website. They have a page of all their international presences around the world, which is all of which are just mailboxes, including this one in Belize. It's at this address that doesn't exist. I hired a freelancer to go and have a look for me. Can you go and find this address for me?
Wow.
So, oh yeah, the power of the internet. I mean, it was you know, it wasn't, you know, it was an afternoon's work for some guy who actually he did some digging into me and said, you know, I'm up for this. Actually, this is outrageous. So anyway, he said, okay, this address doesn't exist, but this one does, and he pointed me to this shack, which is like, I don't know, if one's 3190, the other one's 3160. So anyway, it turned out this shack is owned by a senator in the Belize government.
Of course.
Who also runs a company selling off-the-shelf companies and vehicles to dodge tax registration in other countries. So I mean, let's be clear here. There are two things going on here. There's the Webberleys hiding the ownership of GenderGP, and there's whoever owns GenderGP dodging their taxes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
we can put these together pretty easily.
It's beyond sleazy. Beyond sleazy.
Yeah.
So, but what's more beyond sleazy is that despite the fact that GenderGP is this extremely disreputable organization that is clearly involved in some sleaze that has been sanctioned by the government and is under mysterious ownership that involves tax dodging, and once the word Belize comes up, you know it's like super sketchy, right? Belize is like
Daniel.
There are people. There's somebody who's like a prominent figure in the Green Party works for GenderGP to this day. Like, you know, well, once you call yourself trans, you can be involved in obvious, shady business, and nobody cares. Yeah.
That leads me on to a question, Daniel. Can I ask, what do you do in your daily life? Is this something that you would normally do, these kinds of investigations?
No, not really. I work in the area of children. I don't work with children. Right. Part of my job is around making sure that local government functions work well and work effectively. So I've long had an interest in safeguarding children in particular. Yeah.
I just find it fascinating that a story that's as big as this. I mean, you've got me, a comedy writer, you who works with children, Helen, a software engineer, and Artie's a barman. And we're here doing the job of fucking journalists that journalists should be doing. It's insane.
If I might say, I've pitched this story, and I thought this was just scandalous. I thought this was front page news stuff.
It's a big story.
You know, a woman who lives in Abergavenny, and I'll say that, she lives in Abergavenny. You know, she doesn't live in Spain like she claims to. And
she doesn't live in Spain?
No.
Abergavenny.
What is that?
It's
a town. It's a rather agreeable small town in the Welsh valleys, in the Welsh hills rather. So they live there. But I think part of the failure here is about recognizing that a lot of companies these days operate entirely online. So this idea of, you know, have they moved to Spain or not, it's a non-story. The answer is they've got a holiday home in Spain. So of course, you know, as we all know, you go on holiday, you take your laptop sometimes, and sometimes you do some work. So therefore, you know, where they are is irrelevant. Yeah. Where GenderGP is located is wherever Helen Webberley, Mike Webberley, and all the other people involved in GenderGP open their laptops.
Yeah.
And I think that difficulty, plus the fact that we've got two regulatory bodies here, Health Inspectorate Wales and the Care Quality Commission. It just confuses and confuddles things deliberately on their part, of course, and so, you know, I would have expected this to have gone through the courts, through the CQC. I'd have expected this to be splashed on the newspapers. Yeah. I've pushed this endlessly to newspapers, to Private Eye, to television producers. No one's interested.
Yeah. It's fascinating to me that even Private Eye doesn't care about it, because they're usually good at spotting these kinds of sketchy people. They kind of live for revealing it, but I guess it's still not on people's radar. Listen, I'm really sorry to interrupt, Daniel, but we've got a bunch of people coming on, and I realize we should have made you. We should have actually spoken to you. We should do a follow-up program that just really goes into the Webberleys. Yeah. So let's do that. But for the moment, I'd like to bring in our second
and I need a drink. Hang on. Can I get a drink?
Would you like a drink, darling?
I would like a drink.
If there's anything else you need, anybody else want a drink? Because I'm just going to go back to the bar now.
I'm okay. Thank you. We'll see you in a bit. I was actually going to introduce Johnny Best, but I'm afraid he's been upstaged there terribly. We'll see more from Mr. Meadow later. Hi, Johnny. How are you doing?
Johnny!
Sorry, I was muted there.
Hi, Johnny.
That's absolutely fine. Johnny, thank you for appearing. This is the first time I've seen you face to face, and we've been through quite a bit together. I'll tell you a funny story about Johnny. When Johnny was investigated. He was a student and he was investigated. One of the reasons given for his transphobia was that he was exchanging polite words with me.
I was associating positively with you. Those were the words that were used.
That's the word.
So associate positively with Graham Linehan. I do indeed. Yeah.
And you then had like, as we all know, the process is the punishment, but you had a number of years where that was hanging over your head, didn't you?
I mean, it was, I don't know how long it took in the end. It was over a year and a half. It was because the initial complaint against me was June of 2 years ago. Yeah. And it was only just finally resolved just back in March, April this year. So, but the Office of the Independent Adjudicator had a lot of COVID related student complaints to deal with. So I didn't mind them sort of just getting through a lot of those before they things move very slowly. The university had to be dragged kicking and screaming into acknowledging that they'd done anything wrong. I mean, even at the point of the submitting the last evidence to the adjudicator, the university was still saying we've done nothing wrong. If Johnny had a problem, he should have spoken to us. He doesn't have the right to bring this complaint. They were absolutely unrepentant. So they still don't care.
It's very strange, this kind of attitude that these institutions have. They seem completely enthralled to what one might call the trendiness, I guess, of gender ideology. They just don't seem to see it as so. They seem to be controlled by what their students are telling them to do. Is that a fair thing to say? Or?
I mean, it is. But you've got to remember the guy who complained about me was a fellow PhD student, another adult, a mature student like I am, a few years younger than me, a fellow music student. It wasn't a child. It was a former friend of mine, and the university were completely incurious. Oh yeah, it's a former friend of mine. He'd come over to to join me on a dog walk. We used to drink together. So he. But the university was completely incurious as to why a former friend would behave like this. So all you have to do in a university to trigger the sort of thing that happened to me, all you have to do is say a few key words about feeling unsafe, about fearing victimization. You just have to trigger the university's sort of very one-sided response to the Equality Act. And any attempt that you make to sort of stick up for your own free expression rights are used as an indicator of your moral disgustingness. So I got a letter from the Dean of Music, Humanities and Media saying, you've stuck up for your free expression rights all the time, but you have not acknowledged that the views you hold could have invalidated someone else's identity. I'm paraphrasing. I'm like, well, no, I haven't, because I don't have to. I haven't attacked anyone. I haven't harassed anyone. I've been talking about ideas, and I happen not to take these ideas seriously. You can't make me take them seriously. So the whole complaint was thrown out. But the university has been absolutely disgraceful. They remain disgraceful. I'm phenomenally angry with them. So I'm waiting to hear what they're going to say about the FOI I've put in to find out about their relationship with Stonewall, because they're a diversity champion, but they've refused every FOI about Stonewall so far. So I put one in, and if necessary, I'll go.
Are they allowed to refuse an FOI?
Well, apparently not on this subject, but they did to someone else back in March, April, saying it was confidential, commercially sensitive. So I put one in, and they're due to respond early July. If they don't, I'll take it as far as I need to, if necessary, to the Information Commissioner. But we'll get the information out of them. So
Johnny wrote the letter that I co-signed about 5 years ago that I always talk about, because when people both
it just
sides,
feels like 5 years ago. It's 3 years ago.
Sorry, 3 years ago. It just feels like 5. Yeah, but it was 3 years ago, and so 3 years ago we went to Stonewall, and one of the key things we asked for in that letter that Johnny wrote,
I wrote it with Kate Harris.
Kate Harris,
we worked very closely on all of that, and it wouldn't have happened without Kate.
Yes, and it was but the thing about it was that it was literally a call to detoxify the debate. Yeah. That was the most important aspect of it. We were saying, please help us create a space where we can talk about this without people being called bigots and without hateful language being exchanged, and they refused. They refused within the day, I think. Would that be right, Johnny?
Yeah. Well, it was. There were letters. Then the letters became Kate was sort of doing letters, and then it became the petition, which was more the thing that I wrote with some contribution from Kate, and everything was just stonewalled.
Stonewalled, yeah.
Yes, everything was appropriately stonewalled. But then we had that the day of the petition. That evening, I went on the PM program with Ruth Hunt, and Ruth wouldn't discuss in the studio with me. She would only speak after I'd spoken, and she would only speak on the condition that I had no right of reply. And her argument there was, absolutely. And her argument there was that it's not Stonewall's responsibility to host the debate. And I think that's
insane.
Okay, I mean that's an argument. Maybe you could say that, but I think it is Stonewall's job to acknowledge that it's given sort of tacit sort of legitimacy to people who have abused women and flung abuse around and demonized others. And also Stonewall has been calling lesbians transphobic, and Stonewall's tried to keep its sort of corporate image clean and shiny while sort of being sort of tacitly hands-off sort of responsible for sort of fostering some terrible behavior. And they're just saying, it's nothing to do with us. It's nothing to do with us. And I think it is. It is to do. It is to do with them.
Yeah, a lot of this is to do with them. We could have genuinely the heat in this debate has made lots of it is to do with Stonewall. They could have taken the heat out of it really quite easily by acknowledging that there's a bit of a conflict in some areas, and just saying, okay, there is. Let's see if we can't try and sort it out.
This is what was striking about the response to the petition, and it did come very quickly. I think it came the same day, as you say, Graham. And Ruth Hunt wrote, again, I'm paraphrasing, but pretty accurately, we do not and will not acknowledge that there is a conflict between trans rights and women's rights. And it was do not and will not. We don't acknowledge it, and we are not going to ever acknowledge it. That was what Ruth Hunt said. But that implacability was there from the very start. And I think the thing about Stonewall going what they call trans inclusive, but really becoming a gender identity organization rather than a trans rights organization, is that they gave a new kind of legitimacy to these ideas. Their involvement secured that sort of coming together of what looks to the outside world in many cases like just the next stage of LGBT activism, with this sort of radical sort of totalitarian gender identity theory, packaged by Stonewall with the power of Stonewall's brand and all of the positive associations that Stonewall has to good liberals throughout the UK. I mean, that together forms this very sort of difficult situation. It's counterintuitive for every decent liberal to say that Stonewall is anything other than spot on. It's been spot on for 25 years. So Stonewall not being spot on is, I mean, it's an upward struggle to get anyone to even consider that possibility, because it all gets very, very tribal. Stonewall's been right for 25 years. You know, how come they're now wrong? It's more likely that we're wrong.
Well, I think it's fair to say that that's a conversation we've all had with ourselves. Like, you know, you especially when you're entering into this debate, a feeling of, well, I must be, you know, you examine and double examine your views to make sure that you're actually on solid ground.
Yeah, and I think we should do that. It's really important that we do that, and you know, always keep doing it, because it is complicated, and finding the right road through it is difficult. So, you know, my confidence has wobbled here and there, but
it's inevitable, isn't it, that you like the sheer pressure of everybody being on the other side. But it's so strange. Like, do you think? Let me ask Daniel as well. Do you feel that it's changed? I mean, it does feel like that where we are now is very different from where we were a year ago. Would you say that's true, Daniel?
Oh, absolutely. I think for me, although I've tracked this topic for years, I think really last summer was the point at which it dawned on me just how captured every single aspect of child protection in particular was. And I felt, actually, I remember having conversations with people at work, and it was very much, no, don't confirm this by email. No, I'm not going to sort of pursue this officially. It was, you know, very much conversations off the record. And I work for a fairly benign organisation in this regard. It's not by any means captured. But I feel now, actually, that rather that it's inevitable that we are going to have to ask some quite difficult questions here. The sort of questions that have been banned almost over the last year or so. But to not ask them would be negligent. And I think people are starting to realise that now, that actually that if they don't address these issues, particularly around child safeguarding, people are going to go to prison.
Yeah, that's very well put.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think another thing that Maya Forstater suggested was we may even need a process along the lines of truth and reconciliation after apartheid ended in South Africa, you know, because there is so much pain that has been caused by this. You know, I've had people in my personal life who won't talk to me, who refuse to believe that I have anything legitimate to say on this issue because of the way that I've been painted, not just by magazine, you know, trash like Pink News, but also by organizations like Stonewall not helping bring the debate down, you know.
All of the children, all of the bloody children that have been sort of affirmed as that they're trans, or even, you know, the whole idea of it is there's got to be lessons learned from this.
Well, there's a long way to go before any sort of truth and reconciliation there. I mean, I think the looking at what happened this week with the establishment of the gender critical research group at the Open University and the pushback against that, I think what the Forstater judgment has done, which of course it was extraordinary and wonderful, but it's going to unleash a whole new chapter of argument and dispute. And I think they're going to be much more, I think they're going to be even more difficult disputes, because there's going to be a very powerful pushback against the idea that gender critical views are legitimate. And we're already seeing that in the statement that LSE Gender Department made about the Gender Critical Research Group. It's a defamatory statement. It's absolutely vile. But they feel empowered to do this. They feel that they are morally right. And so this, I think it's going to intensify the struggle for a good while yet. I think we're a long way from being able to put it behind us. And certainly I work in the academia and the arts, and those are the two, you know, I'm a long way from feeling positive about where any of those are going.
women.
Yeah. I'm very nervous about schools. Schools are like it seems the teachers are captured a lot. A lot of teachers are captured, and that's going to make it even harder to get these entrenched views out of the next generation of college students and so on. So listen, Helen, we've got James Dreyfus now here, but is Mr. Menno going to join us as well?
Yes, Mr. Menno wants to join us too, as he should.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Hey, how are you?
Look, I was really surprised. He's so much taller than me. Look.
Hello, Johnny. Hello, Daniel. Hello.
Sorry to hear that the man who's scared of ribbons got you booted off Twitter, Mr. Menno. Another gay man taken down by the homophobic bit part actor in Scotland. So it was a real shame, but I hope that you're going through the process of getting your account back.
Well, we've just been talking about this.
No better woman.
Process.
So I waited for a while, right? Because it sucks, obviously, but what really gets me about it, and it really got me down, is what it represents. Is that you can't just say basic things. You can't ask questions. If somebody says trans women are women and makes money of running a publication that pushes that message out, yet when he looks for a surrogate, he looks specifically for a female. Like, that doesn't add up. So it's only fair that you ask a question about it. Obviously,
yes,
I have
just
to
explain. You asked that question of Benjamin Cohen, who's the one of the big news,
right.
Pink News non-journalists, and he was the one who was famously looking for a surrogate.
Right, and it wasn't about making fun that he wants to have a child. It wasn't about making fun of people who identify as trans. It's just like, well, you say one thing, you use that to make money, but then when it comes to it, you realize what a woman is. So that doesn't add up. So let's put that to the tune of a Michael Jackson song. And
and that's what you got banned for.
That's what I was told I was banned for. So I know that Paisley afterwards, he posted a screen grab of an email he received from Twitter saying, thank you for reporting Mr. Menno, and we've suspended him, blah, 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 blah. Who knows? There may be all sorts of mass reporting that has got on, but all I'm aware of is it was my little song Serenade for Mr. Cohen, which was, the singing was pretty good, I think, because normally I'm a bit
You did a song.
It was a bomb.
Let me sorry to interrupt you, and I did say that I was going to try and speak less in this one because it's the big gay episode, so I need to pull back a bit, so excuse me.
That's why I wore this, right? Because
exactly.
But let me pull back or gay up, Graham. One of the two.
Let me bring in James Dreyfus, and then I will let the gayness just kind of take over. Hi, James. How are you doing?
I don't know why you think introducing me would bring up the gayness.
It couldn't hurt. It couldn't hurt. Let's put it that way. James, hello. How are you doing?
James, where are they?
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us, James. James, what do you think? Do you feel like it changes in the air? Do you think things are getting slightly better?
Well, I do, but I also have this terrible feeling that as success comes, there will be a backlash, and as these juggernauts, the wheels are coming off them. There's going to be a backlash. That if there is, a horrifically transphobic event that happens, we will be rounded on as being the proponents of it. It's a deeply disingenuous argument, this, but it's the same thing as putting trans rights to human rights at the bottom. Well, no one's disagreeing with that.
Yes.
Nobody fundamentally here disagrees with any of that. We all believe that trans people are entitled to exactly the same as the rest of us. There's no debate about this. But of course, it's very, very easy to say you're a despicable transphobe, trans right to human rights. It sort of pulls the rug from under your feet, really. So I'm not so sure that this is going to go very smoothly at all. I think it's going to get nastier and nastier and more unpleasant and also more untruthful.
And I think that backlash, that's going to hurt us all. That's going to hurt the gays. It's going to hurt the lesbians. It's going to hurt the bisexuals.
Yes.
Are we to blame for this, to part, as in the gay community, us, the gays, us? I mean, when I was involved in pride organisations, sort of 20 years ago, we absolutely embraced transsexuals as they were known then, and it was, we sort of welcomed them into the sort of, into the pride festivals, into clubs, and it was very much, well, yes, they are part of this community. If they're not gay now, they were gay before they transitioned, and we've always, as a community, we've always been very relaxed about gender bending, about transsexuals, calling transsexuals by the pronouns they want, and all this was, I mean, when I was involved, all this was done. It was about making lives easier for people, and then I kind of drifted away from the gay community, from the gay scene, and I came back, and this monster suddenly appeared, where suddenly these fictions are taken as fact.
Just goes back quite a long time, and something I watched the other day. It's from '72, and it's called "Let Me Die a Woman," and it's a documentary with a surgeon who sort of ties all the different bits of the documentary together about these people. But these are like the old school transsexuals, if you like, that go all the way, but they don't want to be seen as transsexuals. They want to be seen as literal women, and it's called "Let Me Die a Woman." And already, and this is '72, you get these tropes of they are real women, and if they don't get help, they're going to kill themselves. So that's quite old, that narrative, and that's, I guess, maybe why it resonates so much today as well, because it's been around forever.
I mean, I agree, but I also remember back in the day that all the trans people that I used to hang out with were extremely proud to be trans women and men, and it was that pride seems to have been shot down somewhere along the way.
Yes, it's been replaced by an angry defensiveness that's so unnecessary, because no one wants to go around misgendering anyone, But
that says diversity, and yet they are unwilling to recognize the differences that make us diverse. I'm supposed to accept that Eddie Izzard is the same as my mum. No.
It's that step into literalism, which is the important thing. And I don't know exactly. I don't think there was a moment where it sort of switched from one to the other, because that idea of you must literally believe that trans woman is a woman. That's several decades old. That strain of activism that was sort of underway. The Christine Burns generation were developing. That was going all the way through that, but it wasn't until you get Stonewall becoming trans inclusive and therefore sort of offering an added legitimacy to trans-only organizations. It wasn't until all of that comes together that this literalism was then enforced, and this whole system for enforcing the literalism was developed. With Stonewall glossary, the whole if you don't believe this, you're transphobic. It was that moment that all of the different currents and processes came together in this monolith and of sort of literalist dogma. And
actually, and you can see it today, because I've been marveling, because people have sort of put their weight behind trans women are women. You see them now having to defend the idea of Laurel Hubbard in the Olympics. And it's quite extraordinary to see people sort of tying themselves up in knots to do it, but they are doing it, and they are doing it because exactly as you say, John, because of the literalism about it.
I mean, they've painted themselves into a corner, haven't they?
I mean, when I worked with Queer Up North back, which is years ago now, I left in 2010, but I was there 2005, 2010, and most of the work at Queer Up North, good. I think about half of it was trans-based. It was work that was all about playing with gender, but there was never at all any expectation that any of us were asked to believe that by playing around this gender stereotype or that gender stereotype. People were actually changing sex or gender. There was no sniff of literalism at that time. And when the festival was protested by trans activists, some of whom went on to be in Stonewall's trans advisory group, the trans artists in the festival were pushing back, saying this is totalitarian bullshit.
Really?
So
that's interesting.
No, absolutely. And there's some leading trans artists who are at the top of their game. So it was
such an unnecessary fight. It's such an unnecessary fight. It's more about a particular kind of trans activism becoming the dominant strain and taking over institutions, and from managing to take over Stonewall, being able to using Stonewall to get into the whole of civil society. But it's a particular kind of trans activism. It's not the only kind of trans activism. Okay, it's suffocated all other kinds at the moment, but it's not inevitable that it has to be the only kind. It wasn't always this way. Well, wouldn't you say, actually, when I've often noticed that when it comes to the really kind of venomous trans rights activism, you're talking about the people like Pryor and Mimi Mum and Helen Islam and all these people. It's actually not that many people who are pushing it. They're like a very well placed. In fact, I think it was Lisa Buggeridge who said that it only takes one or two very well placed people in an institution to groom that institution. And these people seem to have groomed Stonewall, which has gone on to groom society.
Yeah, I mean, the key activist who was leading the protest against Queer Up North, I mean, it was a pathetic protest. There were like 6 people. Was the same trans activist who was persecuting Julie Bindel for years, and then went on to work with Stonewall. I mean, it is a relatively small number of people, but it's grown. But that's why the relationship with Stonewall, the process of taking over Stonewall and sort of running gender identity through the whole of its policy platform is so important. Without that, we don't get to where we are today. I mean, we wouldn't be there because it wasn't enough for there to be gendered intelligence and mermaids. That wouldn't get us where we are today. It needed that 25 years of great work by Stonewall, the legitimacy of that brand, the power and trustedness of that brand to get us where we are now.
I think that's the absolute key. I really do. I think all the things that went before with Stonewall, and I remember being part of the Equality show and being sold the line. We want to get to a place where it doesn't even matter. I can't wait to get to a day where I'm not known as a gay actor, but just an actor. And I believe that we've been totally sold down the river now. And we've got more and more labels than ever.
Yeah,
and we're going completely the wrong direction. And
I completely agree. It's a backward politics. It's a completely regressive politics.
I say that Stonewall. I compare Stonewall to Cujo, who was once a lovely dog that everyone loved and ran around on the farm and licked people and you loved him. And then suddenly he goes chasing after wild rabbits and gets bitten by a rabbit bat. And now look what happened. But you go up to Cujo and you trust him because for 20 years he's been lovely. Yeah. But now you don't know what's going to happen.
And you're hoping that maybe he'll return back to normal.
Yeah. You hope. But it's lunacy.
It is. I always thought when I was involved with this and the changes and the rapid acceptance of gay people in their lives into broader society. Once that happened, I'd always had in my mind that once we won, we would just dissipate. We would just blend back into society.
That was what's his name, the previous CEO of Stonewall, Ben Somerskill. That was Ben's position. Ben was giving interviews in 2009 saying that he thought within his lifetime Stonewall would shut up shop. He gave an interview to Krishnan Gurumurthy, and I think it was 2009.
Wow.
In 2007. I think it was 2009, saying he thinks in his lifetime that Stonewall would probably just close its doors. I haven't been able to actually I found reports of the interview. I haven't been able to find the actual interview, but that's the line that was reported.
Well, the way I look at it is that Stonewall discovered this kind of resource that they hadn't considered before, which was straight people. You know, they like straight people are like coal, and they suddenly discovered this huge coal seam and say, oh, if we call these straight people, you know, if we call these straight people queer, then you know we can. And also another thing that happened.
That wasn't Stonewall's idea. It wasn't that idea of queer isn't Stonewall's.
Oh
idea.
no, sure, but I just mean once they took advantage of gender ideology, then they realized, oh, we can open the door. Like I saw someone speaking on that thing last night, and no offense, I know there's definitely, you know, obviously bisexuality is a valid sexuality, but this person said, well, I'm bisexual. I'm currently in a relationship, and it was a woman. So I'm currently in a relationship with a man. It's like, oh, okay. You know, it's like it sometimes it gets a little bit okay. So really, you're talking at the moment as a heterosexual person, you know, and it's like suddenly everyone gets a view on gay rights, and I don't know.
I think sexuality isn't black and white, and I don't have a problem with someone, you know, sort of stating that they're bisexual and currently in a heterosexual relationship. I don't think that invalidates their bisexuality.
Let me just finish one thing, Johnny, just in case this gets misreported. My problem is when those same people,
of course, it will get misreported, Graham.
Yeah, exactly. But when those same people call other people bigots, other people, that's when I get really annoyed, you know, and that's when the you know. The resource of straight people begins to kind of annoy me, because it's like you can't come into a group and suddenly decide that other gay people are bigots.
I'm getting sick of straight people telling me how to do gay rights. I'm getting sick.
Yeah. This is the other thing that's so insidious about this. It's like we now have to somehow justify that we are male or female or gay or lesbian to even have a conversation. Like, especially, I get these younger girls, and they're like, I am male. And it's like, and I can't say you're not, because you get chucked off Instagram or Facebook.
Yeah.
And it's like, what makes you think you're male? Oh, my hormone levels are this much testosterone per nanoliter, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, men are not a hormone level.
Yeah. Someone said that the other day, women are not a hormone level.
Are not a hormone level. Or, you know, it goes back to the whole thing. Women aren't woman isn't a feeling, woman isn't a state of mind, neither is men. And even though this always revolves around what is a woman, what the real bigger question is if you ask what is a woman, you have to ask what is a man. So basically what you're saying is, what is a human? What makes us human? And we've got a massive industry that is trying to rip us apart.
Yes. And
say it's all just feels.
I don't mind different views about what is a man, what is a woman. I mean, I come at this as a liberal more than anything else. I object to one particular set of answers to that question being enforced, and that anyone who deviates being demonized as bigoted and thrown out of their jobs and all the rest of it. No, I mean, it's fine for there to be all sorts of arguments about the answer to the question, what is a man and what is a woman? I mean, you know, but it's the enforcement, it's the dogmatism, it's the totalitarianism that I object to.
Absolutely.
But let's be clear, this is enforcement in one direction. This is male people who want access to female spaces. And the
opposite now. We're also losing gay spaces to females who claim they're men.
This is being driven. This is, you know, the definition of man is still adult human male in the dictionary, and the definition of woman is contested. You know, this is being driven, and you see it in the literalism that it's about access to sex. All of this stuff about how you're supposed to have sex, you know, based on someone's gender identity and not their biological sex. I see that as the engine that's driving a lot of this. This is autogynephilic heterosexual males. When the T in the LGB were gender bending, gender non-conforming, former, if you'd like, homosexuals who are the trans people who were our friends. You know, the trans bar I worked at had autogynephilic transsexuals, but it was mostly homosexuals. You know, these were gender non-conforming people. And this new movement is being driven by people who aren't homosexual, who identify as trans. And I see that as really the big disruption in this, that these are straight men, essentially, who are ripping this all apart because their desire isn't about gender bending, it's about access to sex. while they, you know. Yeah.
I think that's very true, and I think that some of the worst aspects of trans rights activism, which we really can say that mainstream trans rights activism is venomously aggressive and hyperbolic and misogynistic and homophobic. But the worst aspects of it come from AGP qualities, which AGP, like I don't know. What is that?
Big Brother again.
Way to fix the alarm system. Contractors
Is that Stonewall outside? With
Muted. It's shockingly not muted.
That's a Kelly's phone for you, Artie.
Who is that? Oh,
is there a special discount for like 2 get 1, buy 1 get 1 free?
But I know that I think Ray Blanchard talked about some of the qualities that go hand in hand with AGP, and some of them are, narcissistic personality disorder, and there's the kind of violently entitled and demanding and very, very selfish aspect of all this, where it's only my experience that matters, like you see it a lot when you see trans-identified people like the death metal guitarist. I won't say their name in case they try and get me back, but the death metal guitarist is constantly saying, no children like me will be saved, because they're only looking at it through the framework of this particular person wants to get facial feminization surgery, and it has helped this particular person. It's like what you say, Artie, about it's something you do, not something you are. But these same people are pretending that it is something you are, which is, excusing their treatment of children, which is
a contradiction happening here. So on the one hand, we're told there's no such thing as a man or a woman. On the other hand, you have an industry that's growing 20% year on year to reach 1.5 billion in 2026, which is about making people look like the opposite sex. So obviously there are people who want those services, and there are people who provide those services who know very well what a man or a woman is. I'm doing some research into that at the moment, and you've got surgeons that study the skulls of men and women to see how the bone structure and the density is different, so they know how to manipulate it, so they can put woman face in the window as something to sell to men with either identity issues or an erotic fixation. Now you might say, well, people can do what they want, right? If they want the surgery, go for it. But again, what we're looking at here is the deconstruction, the clinical deconstruction and the commodification of what it means to be human. Now, I would rather say, stop right there. Stop that. Because it's reductive and it's dehumanizing. That's
Kate Harris said last night on that Tortoise broadcast, 37,000 girls are waiting to have unnecessary double mastectomies. 37,000.
That's just the ones waiting. That's just the people waiting, which means we've got tens of thousands going through it right now. That's just the backlog. But you have to remember, like WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, we had some detransitioners on a couple weeks ago, and one of them said that the board of directors was all plastic surgeons. And lo and behold, that is true.
What?
This is not a mental health organization. It is a plastic surgery organization. And they are masquerading as the guardians of transgender health, so that a real organization that actually is run by psychologists and psychiatrists won't do it. They're taking the place of psychologists and psychiatrists because they are trying to create a market for plastic surgery.
It's all marketing. And also what they do, there's one particular surgeon called Dr. Spiegel, which is hilarious because Spiegel means mirror in Dutch and in German. And he holds up what I call a mirror of lies. So he tells his patients, these males, I'm not just going to make your face look more feminine. I'm going to give you the face that you were meant to be born with, which is fantastic marketing.
I think it's getting a little bit paranoid, actually. I think there's adults who want to take this route. Are perfectly entitled to do so. I'm actually really uncomfortable with the way the conversation's gone, because I think it's crossed a line from considering what the right approach with children and young people is, and how adults can have control over their own lives and go in their own way. And I think there's a danger that these. I'm not saying that there isn't truth in what you're saying, and maybe it's all true, but it also gets a little bit carried away as a sort of paranoid fantasy of deception and lies. And I I'm afraid I don't buy that. I think that there is a distinction between how we approach children and young people and the issues of safeguarding, and then how adults are able to make their own choices in life. And I think this idea that it's all deception. I
don't think it's all deception, but it's undoubtedly a factor.
At the end of the day, a man is a man and a woman is a woman. Now, if you read some of the blog posts that these people who are adults and they spend their own money, they can do what they want, but some of them see this as their ticket into womanhood. They describe it as a rite of passage that justifies to them that they are now a real, literal woman. Now,
okay, but it sounds like you're saying that about everyone, and I don't think that's fair.
Let me bring in Daniel. Daniel has something to add to this.
I mean, essentially, we're talking about two very different cohorts of people here with two very different conditions presenting. We're talking about heterosexual adult men who have, AGP, call it a fetish, call it a mental disorder, call it an orientation, whatever. But that's very different to the colossal growth in girls. Period gender identity clinics. The closest approximation we've probably got to that phenomenon is anorexia, and it's the new anorexia. And so in terms of sort of how do we treat, how do we support these girls, it's going to give you a very different answer to how you support men. So I'm not actually sort of entirely sure that you're perhaps talking slightly across purposes here.
Yes, I think that's true. I think there's a number of things going on, but I think I know what you're saying, Tony, with
I'm saying that there doesn't seem to be any consideration that there might be adult people who are doing what's right for them.
No.
This is starting to sound. I don't know. I mean, it's
no, Johnny. Let me just say.
It's bigotry. I'm sorry,
but.
I mean, you can shut me off if you want.
No, Johnny. I think that's an unfortunate word to use, to be honest, Johnny. But let me just say where I stand on all this. I believe there are people who suffer from gender dysphoria, and I believe that one of the problems that's happening at the moment is you cannot see those people you cannot see the wood for the trees, and those people need specific and usually just before this became fashionable, before this became a trend, those people were able to access the healthcare they needed. Now we are saying that, as Daniel said, a AGP male is the same as a young woman who's suffering from dysphoria. They're not. They need very different treatments. They need to be spoken about in different ways. And this whole thing of calling everybody trans is making that process completely, confusing and hard to manage. I think that's what. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what you were getting at, wasn't it, Mr. Wisdom?
Well, I think I want to say that it's very difficult to talk about this because everybody's picturing one person in their minds, a kind of platonic trans person, and we all have different platonic trans people in our minds. And there are so many different people who identify as trans. And I think maybe, Johnny, what you're trying to say is there are adults who are feminine homosexuals who want to transition for their personal reasons, and we shouldn't vilify them. And that's absolutely true.
That's exactly
because we can also talk about that there's a factor of persuasion in all of this. There's no question that there are people trying to market. People who otherwise wouldn't undergo these surgeries are being marketed to and being told that this is magical. There's a very small number of people who would choose to modify their bodies, and typically that could change, but that's the realm of cosmetic surgery. This is what we're talking about, is adults choosing to get cosmetic surgery, but this is being marketed as adults discovering an inner true self through cosmetic surgery, and that's dangerous. And this is being
through pharmaceuticals, two hugely profitable industries. That aspect has to be discussed. And
I guess for me, what I take issue with is, as I said earlier, if somebody wants to do it, I can't stop them. I'm not going to stand outside a surgeon's practice and with a big sign saying don't do this. But there is a sense of entitlement that says, I've had this procedure, now I am an ordinary woman and you will have to accept me. That's what I take issue with, because again, I'm not going to say that Eddie Izzard is the same as my mum. You're going to have to draw a line between what do you accept as a woman, because when it comes to women's rights and the rights of girls, there are no fluffy, there's no fluff. The woman is an adult human female, and that's it. So there's a whole big capitalist movement here that's trying to take advantage of people who have issues and make them believe what they want to believe.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, like for me, you know, we've had this conversation about, for women for years, you know, the idea of getting sort of breast augmentation or sort of plastic surgery. It's, you know, people are adults and are absolutely allowed to do what they want. You know, the only issue that I certainly have, and I'm sure that all of us really, is the idea that, you know, women's rights are under threat. That's it. You know, the Olympics, women's spaces, that's it. I don't care how anyone dresses, how anyone looks, what anyone wants to do, but I do care about women's spaces. And
yeah, it's worlds colliding, isn't it? And when comparisons are made by former members of Stonewall saying it's just like the gay rights movement of the 80s and 90s, it couldn't be more nonsense. Of nonsense than because no one was impinging upon another group. This is what I can't seem to get through to people. It's not about suppressing your rights. It's saying you are asking to move into someone else's group of rights. In fact, you're not even asking; you're just doing it. Yes. And that other group has a right to go, hang on a second, let's at the very least, let's debate. Now, the response back from that was no. And if you say no, automatically, by default, you don't even have to say anything else. By default, you are a transphobe. There's no winning it. This is where I can't seem to come out whether one should win or not. But just that basic point of one group impinging on another group can't be right.
Yeah. As James A. Jones said, you know, women say no, and in the end, you know, I think that's why it's really why I got involved 3 years ago, because I think women have a right to say no, and they don't have to explain why. They have a right to say no.
I mean, the whole Me Too movement was sort of celebrating women saying, you know, my boundaries were violated, and people saying, well done for standing up and saying it. It's hard to say. It's hard to say no. But now suddenly you've got a movement that's coming along who's incredibly hostile. I think
that's why it's important that men started to get involved, because we're not under the same pressures, and it's not existential for men. We're not faced with losing the same things, the same safety, the same issues are not in play. And so while I wouldn't, you know, it's not my views on feminism of no interest to anyone, not even to me, but it is important for blokes to sort of step up and assert that, and stand by women who say no, and said, yeah, you know, they're saying no. It's a no, guys. It's a no, and that's really, for me, you know, what mattered back in 2018, and still really does.
What I like about the current atmosphere as well is I'm seeing a lot more gay men stand up for women. It's really been inspiring the last few months.
Yes.
You know, I've found it. It's gone from very, very almost nothing to not just people standing up, but people standing up under their own names, under their own faces, and proudly doing it. So it's because of, you know, people, the kind of people who are here today, you know, trailblazers.
But we all have others.
Sorry?
We were all born of a woman. This is the one thing that we all have in common in life. And that's why often when, you know, you're having all these debates, I'm like, think of your mum. What are you saying? What about your mum? What about your sisters? What about your little goddaughter or whatever? All these women in your life. Why are you okay with the boundaries being broken?
Funnily enough, I think one of the main problems there actually is that so many women are supportive of the extreme other side.
But that is the difficulty of saying no as a woman. It's part. Yes. You know, you can see what happens. You can see what happened. You saw what happened to J.K. Rowling for the very mindest of things, and she's a billionaire. And the backlash was so severe, and we've spoken about it so many times. It's difficult. It's much easier to be celebrated and patted on the back and said, you know, well done. And it's nice to be part of something that people like you and want to hear what you've got to say. That is nice. So I'm genuinely, you know, a lot of the women on the other side, I can quite see the sort of the pull of it.
Yeah, but it's all wrapped up in that overall offer of left-wing woke politics, and that you've got critical race theory, gender identity theory, all of that together. It's deeply tribal, and in a way, there isn't just one thing happening here, and there's a tribal divide between those who are part of that sort of woke. I use woke as a shorthand. It's useful as a shorthand, even though it's not a great term. But there is that sort of cultural movement, and then there are those who oppose that cultural movement. And if you oppose that cultural movement, you're bad people. You know, you're not anti-racist enough, or you're racist, you're transphobic, or whatever. It's all part of the same thing, and it's an emotive thing. It's not an entirely rational thing, and that's why it's so hard to have debates and conversations, because and why there's so much untruth and so much misrepresentation, because these are not rational arguments. This is an emotional confrontation between one very, very emotion driven tribe, which is convinced of its moral superiority and convinced of its opponents sort of moral failing, and so they feel that they can say anything. And that builds the sense of the tribe, and on it goes and on it goes and on it goes. That's why the tone of voice that we use is so important, because it's not about rational exchange. It's really human.
This is what I want to ask. Coming off your point, Johnny, it's not rational. And so how does one, this is how I struggle with it online. How does one deal with it then? Because I've never seen a sort of hatred towards TERFs. I've never seen the language used. I've never seen the gross comparisons, i.e. the anti-Semitic. I've never witnessed anything like this before. And it seems to be polarized on this issue in particular. And when you've got people making comments like, I have a solution to the TERF problem, there was a man called Hitler who got it right. I just think to myself, how does one... How do you counteract that?
Well, I mean, I don't think you can counteract it directly, because the people who do that stuff, and there are many of them, they feel validated in doing it. And institutions like Stonewall and all of the other, they give them tacit support by not condemning them. So they have a body of respectable theory, respectable organizations that seem to empower them. I think you can't win in hand-to-hand combat with those people, as Graham found out, many times on Twitter. Which is why the way I believe the way to counter them is, as has happened, to form new organisations. That's why Women's Place UK. It's why LGBT Alliance. It's why Fair Play for Women. It's why Sex Matters. It's why all these things matter so much, because we have to create new communities that do what Stonewall has done and other organizations have done, and gradually build their legitimacy by maintaining professional tone of voice, by being careful in the way they express things, by being clear, by trying to communicate not to the nutters, not to the woke nutters who are tweeting this nonsense stuff, but to the wider society, to reach out beyond the to the rest of the country through new institutions, new groups, and
it's almost like doing a sorry to interrupt, Daniel. I'll just quickly make this facile point and move on. It's rather like doing a sitcom in front of a live audience. It's sort of, you don't play to the live audience. You've got to remember to play to the camera.
I think that's spot on. I think that's exactly it. And that's the danger of social media, because the audience is right there, but that is not the audience. That is not, those are not the minds that need changing. You've got to get beyond those people.
They will change over time. A good parallel here might be the scares over vaccinations 10, 15 years ago. And at that time, popular opinion was very much against certain vaccinations, like AMR vaccination. We had that scandal with Dr. Andrew Wakefield. And those nutters, and there are still... he still has acolytes, sort of thousands of acolytes, will never change their opinion as far as they're concerned. These drugs are poison, and nothing you say will ever change them. So there's no point wasting your time with those people. You have to change the facts on the ground and then just let popular opinion catch up in due course. So, what's happening now in terms of the change in the debate is setting the seeds for this this kind of work, and popular opinion will shift back over time as long as you keep chipping away with this. You can't argue against a religious debate with a different ideology. Well, you can, but you won't get anywhere. You have to let the facts speak for themselves, and then just let nature take its course.
And I guess when you're talking to someone that you feel, okay, I want to spend some time or energy on this particular conversation, to pinpoint one thing. Like if people go trans this, trans that, I'm like, I don't believe that gay men have vaginas.
Yeah.
I don't believe it. And I start from there and I keep coming back to that. And I think to suggest that gay men have vaginas is deeply homophobic.
Yeah, and also deeply, I would say deeply mentally destabilizing to these young women who are being told this nonsense.
Who really believe it. They really believe it.
Yes, yes. I've seen that happen a few times. I've seen people, I've seen comments by women who are confused as to why they aren't accepted in bathhouses and stuff like this, because they've been fed this line for their whole lives. But they've been fed it by teachers, they've been fed it by gay organizations. It's an extraordinary bit of reckless behavior from these organizations.
Right. And it goes back again to what is a human? What is our literal, most fundamental human nature? It's our reproductive sex, because that determines everything. And that's what they're trying to all, pull apart and say it doesn't matter. And men have vaginas, and men give birth, and women, have penises, and women.
I think, that's such a great way of framing it, because that's just it. It's like this universal acid. Once you try to say that biological sex isn't real, once you start pushing against that, all of the fabric of reality falls apart, and you end up pushing against reality itself. And that's just going to lead you to this endless sense of frustration and of being put upon by reality and by the world. And I think maybe there's an addiction to that too, a kind of victimhood that develops. But it's definitely like a mental, like you can't deny reality. The transsexuals
it's also
weren't, some of them were frustrated with the fact that they weren't the sex they wished they were, but they took, like Johnny was saying, they took some joy in that, at the same time. And there was a sense that it was a difficult thing to have this profound sense of wishing you were a different sex than the sex that you were. But you always knew that was your condition. You didn't literally say that you were a member of the opposite sex. And even if, and it's definitely not the way they're doing it now, where they're telling everyone that they have to pretend that sex doesn't exist. It's just so toxic. Yeah.
I think, and also let's not forget another thing that Stonewall discovered, apart from the great resource of straight people who want to go to Pride, is also the resource of confusing advice that needs to be constantly given organizations because they've destroyed the categories of what it is to be human. If there is no sexual binary, then we've seen the confusion among people at the BBC as to how many genders there are.
Well, that's a really good point. Yes,
all this stuff can be explained forever by organizations.
But that's again a good parallel with critical race theory. You invent something so fiendishly complicated, and then you set yourself up as a priesthood who can explain it to everyone and help everyone to avoid making missteps, because a single misstep will ruin your career or close your company or have you cancelled or whatever. And that's essentially how critical race theory and gender identity theory work, and the organizations that propagate them.
Yeah, this has been a wonderful show, but I'm going to have to wrap it up because I have to go and pick up my heterosexual issue, shall we say?
Yeah, genuinely, I think it's been such a fruitful conversation. It's been so interesting. I think everyone should come back one by one and just do a full hour with us.
Yes, I would really love to do that. Let's do that. Although
so interesting, so interesting.
Yeah, thank you all for giving up your afternoon for this, and we'll get you all back for more of a chat again. But for the moment. Happy Pride Month. Yes, Jen?
Bye, Artie. I'll speak to you about my Canada experience soon.
Oh, yeah.
And welcome back, Helen.
Yes, welcome back, Helen. And we'll see you soon, Mr. Menno. See you soon, Mr. Menno. Artie and Helen, could you hang around? I just want to have a quick word with you after this.
I'll go under the desk.
Cheers, guys.
See you soon, everybody.
Bye-bye. Cheerio.